Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 182 of the podcast. I'm Nick, and today I'm talking with Greg Stier about evangelism in youth ministry, but it really would apply to any ministry, whether you lead kids, students, or adults. What we talk about today applies across the board. It's really more about evangelism than it is even about youth ministry. But before we jump into that conversation, I want to remind you that we have about a week left where you can sign up for Ministry Boost membership. And at Ministry Boost, we provide online courses and coaching for church leaders, primarily in the family ministry world. And we opened membership for the first time ever. So we're having a founders member launch where you can get access to all of the on-demand courses for just $20 a month for 6-month minimum. And if you have more staff at your church to sign up for it, it gets even cheaper than that. It'll never be that price again. It's open until March 12th. And something else that we're excited about are mastermind groups. This is something that we did in the early days. In fact, it's kind of at the beginning of Ministry Boost. Before it had a name, it was its own organization. They're just online coaching groups where we meet every other week via Zoom video call with other leaders that are in the similar role that you're in, and ideally, even in a similar church setting. And we just talk about ministry. What's working for you? What isn't working that you could use some help with? What's a resource that you've used that's been really helpful and you want to share it with the group? And together we get better and we help each other. And it's practical, but it's also coaching. So it's relational. That's the part where with courses and they're on demand, you'll get the practical help, but you're not going to get maybe the relationships and the connection. The mastermind groups provide that. And so normally mastermind groups are $80 a month for 5 months. They meet every other week. But if you're a member of Ministry Boost, it's $50 a month. And in fact, right now, because of this founding members launch, it's actually cheaper to be a Ministry Boost member and do mastermind groups than it is to just do mastermind groups by themselves. So you want to take advantage of that. These groups are going to launch at the end of March, beginning of April, and membership closes March 12th, or at least that price. It'll go up after that. So check it out at ministryboost.org. Get all the links and notes and everything from what we talk about with Greg here today at nickblevins.com/182. But let's jump into my conversation now with him about evangelism and youth ministry. Today we have Greg Stier on the podcast. Welcome, Greg.
Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and what you do with Dare to Share Ministries as we get started.
So yeah, I'm a Denver-based guy. Started Dare to Share 28 years ago, and it's been great. We train, equip, mobilize teenagers to share the gospel. I'm married. I have 2 teenagers myself, and 18-year-old and 15-year-old, and yeah, it's a ministry that's designed to really energize the church, to mobilize youth to gospelize their world. And so we believe that teenagers are kind of the sleeping giant in the church, that if we could really get them equipped to articulate the gospel to their peers, that they could spread the gospel, faster and further than adults. I mean, 70% of the people that come to Christ do it by the time they're age 18. And so if you can really equip, teenagers and children for that matter, to share the gospel, not only will the gospel spread faster, but that younger generation really begins to own their faith. And I think we've kind of got a twisted form of discipleship that starts with information download as opposed to activation. When you look at the way Jesus discipled, the disciples who were most likely under the age of 18. If you look in Matthew 17, 24 through 27, Peter and Jesus and the disciples go into Capernaum, but only Peter and Jesus pay the temple tax. And according to Exodus 30:14, the temple tax was only for those 20 years old and older. And only Peter and Jesus pay. All the disciples are there. The indication is that they're teenagers. The others are teenagers. And the way he discipled them was he mobilized them, and then he trained them along the way. And I think in the Western mindset, we make evangelism the 401 class instead of the 101 class. And by the time they get to 401, they're already institutionalized. So let's get them activated with the gospel and then train them along the way. And that's what we do at Dare to Share. So we do it in all sorts of different ways. But it's is to really help youth leaders and parents mobilize their students and their teenagers for the gospel.
Yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit about, I do want to hear all about what you do and how you help parents and leaders and all that. But how did it get started? It's 28 years, seems like it's gone by fast. But how did it get started? And kind of tell us about the beginnings of it.
Well, the pre-start really happened. I was a kid raised in a high crime rate area, and broken family. My family were kind of like Sons of Anarchy. My uncles, the mafia in our town knew my uncles as the Crazy Brothers. So when the mafia thinks your family's dysfunctional, it's not good. And my mom was the only girl, and she was a fighter. I was a result of basically a short-term trice she had with a dude, and he found out she was pregnant. He got transferred. He was in the Army. She almost aborted me. She drove from Denver to Boston to have an illegal abortion. It was before Roe v. Wade. And my family was a mess, a hot mess of violence and anger and dysfunction. And a preacher from the suburbs reached out to the city. This preacher's nickname was Yankee, even though he spoke with a Southern accent. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Sounds made up, but it's true. He's still alive and preaching in Tampa, Florida. And reached my whole family for Christ. And I became a part of his youth ministry. He had 800 students in his youth group, only 300 adults in his church. He thought the fastest way to reach the city was by mobilizing teenagers. So I come in, no dad. All of a sudden I have, dads and moms that are pouring into me, and trained and equipped. So I got security, I got significance, and I'm ready to rock. And so I started when I was 15, training youth groups in the area how to share the gospel, because I thought, man, this changed my whole family. And that's the unofficial start. And then started Dare to Share. I was a church planter, pastor at a church in the Denver area. Started Dare to Share on the side just because I had a heart for youth. And then after the Columbine High School shooting in 1999, I knew a lot of the kids there. My wife's a public school teacher in the same district. I knew a lot of the kids at Columbine. So I resigned from the church to do Dare to Share full time. And I've been doing it full time since 99.
Wow. And maybe some of this has changed over the time too, but what are some of the specific things you do to help parents and leaders help students, share the gospel through Dare to Share?
So for the first 25 years, it was primarily Dare to Share conferences. So we've, done 200-ish full weekend conferences where we train, equip students, inspire them on Friday night, train them, equip them on Saturday morning, mobilize them on the afternoon to actually go out and share Christ and call their friends and do canned food collections, share Christ. I mean, all sorts of stuff, because we believe the activation part is missing, generally speaking. It's like trying to learn how to fly fish inside. It's just not effective. You got to go out and do it. And then they come back and celebrate. We did that for 25 years. Now we do a live simulcast. Just about a month ago, we did Dare to Share live. 126 cities in one day, simultaneously trained, equipped, and mobilized to share the gospel. So we'll do that again October 10th. So 10/10/2020. We're going to do Dare to Share live, and it's inspiration, motivation, and then application and activation. And then we have curriculum that youth leaders can use, parents can use to train and equip their students. We have a full week training in the summer called Lead the Cause, which is kind of our more in-depth training for student leaders. We do one in Denver, DC, and Chicago. And then we have apps. So our newest app is called Life in 6 Words, and it's a free evangelistic tool where teenagers can share Christ with their friends. They can have faith-sharing groups. It sends them push notifications to pray for their friends by name, and it's really, really cool. I don't think there's an app out there like it. It's Life in 6 Words, and simple way. I mean, a family can create a family group to keep each other accountable with sharing their faith. And even though it's for students, I use it all the time. I've used it. I've probably used it a couple hundred times. I've never been turned down to engage somebody with this. It's a really cool way to share your faith. You have somebody choose which 6 words would best describe their life out of a list of 14, and everybody gets locked in on that. And then you share your 6 words, and then you share the gospel 6 words, and it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. You have another app too, right? That was before that one.
Yeah, we have a Dare to Share app, which is like our evangelism training app,
Yeah.
and it's free as well. So
So
both are available on the App Store.
I'd love to take a peek into a little bit of the practical part of what you do, because obviously leaders listening want to help their students share their faith. They want to share their faith. They want to help their leaders share their faith. I don't think it is just a student thing, but I totally agree with you that is kind of the biggest opportunity. Not only because, like you said, 70% come to faith at that younger age, but also just think about how many more connections we all had as a teenager, and how many more people you were around that were not a part of any church than you do as adults. Especially if you're church, you kind of get in a church bubble sometimes, and you just don't even have those kind of connections anymore. So,
well, it's for the average teen. On the latest research I could find, 425 online and face-to-face friends, and like at our Dare to Share Live, we have gospel conversations starting videos on our Dare to Share Live app that they can send out to we actually have them all send out to their friends. And it starts, we had 22,600 plus gospel conversations started in one day at Dare to Share Live. And so you're right, they can take it far and fast.
mm-hmm.
We often just overlook them. And I'm like, man, it's like the sleeping giant in the church.
Yeah. What practically speaking, and maybe some of this is in the app, of course, too, but what are some of the ways that you help leaders help students, or even what are some of the barriers to get in the way that they just need to help overcome when it comes to sharing faith?
Well, I mean, I think the same thing kids struggle with, we struggle with, it's fear. We don't want to be rejected. And, when you share Christ, I mean, it's a scary thing. And so I think you have to really give them a bigger why. You have to really cast a vision of what's at stake here on earth and in eternity. And then give kids, we reframe the Great Commission for students, because the Great Commission to a teenager just sounds like a bunch of money somebody made on a real estate deal. So we call it the cause. And, kids are into causes, and, we say, hey, stop human trafficking and stop soul trafficking through the gospel. Give the hungry bread and give them the bread of life. Give the thirsty water and living water. Build them the homeless a house here on earth and one in heaven. And so we just make it all these other good causes, a subset of the greatest cause, which is what Jesus gave us, to go and make disciples of all nations. So we don't have to figure out our mission statement. I mean, it was handed down to us by, Christ. So that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, I say that about churches, that churches should have a clear mission statement, but really it's just some kind of rephrasing of the Great Commission. So you already have your starting point. You just got to figure out how you want to word it.
Yeah, we can put our spin on it, but yeah, it's the same. It should be the same thing.
Yeah, and make it memorable. What practically does help? So there's the fear, they got to overcome. What are some ways that, people do that?
Well, I mean, I think, you have to spend time inspiring. And I think oftentimes we say, well, hey, you need to share your faith. And the kid's like, why? I remember once I was talking at a Dare to Share conference, and this girl came up to me because I was talking about hell, the reality of hell. And she's like, you mean to tell me my friends are dying, they're going to go to hell forever if they don't trust Christ? I go, yeah, that's what Jesus said. She goes, why has my youth leader never told me about this? I go, I don't know. You'll have to ask your youth leader. And I think sometimes, we say, well, we don't want to have hellfire and brimstone with these kids. And I'm like, these kids have never heard hellfire and brimstone. Gen Z has no clue about hellfire and brimstone. Maybe our grandparents had it crammed down their throat. And that's not the only motivation. Obviously, that's a slice of the pie. But, Paul said that love of Christ compels us, right? He also said, therefore, because of the fear of the Lord, we persuade men. And that was right after a talk on the rewarding stand of Christ. So we have, rewards and heaven and hell. What we tell students, saving teens from the hell they're headed to and the hell they're going through right now. We have, compassion for the lost. I mean, there's all sorts of motivational, ideas from Scripture that should really inspire students to share their faith. So we have to spend time unpacking that with students, and then we need to give them a how. How do I bring it up? So at Dare to Share, we use three simple words to really help students engage in gospel conversations. Ask, admire, admit. So ask a ton of questions, get to know them, find out what they believe spiritually, then admire what you can about what they believe, find common ground, and like Paul did in Acts 17, and then admit the reason you're a Christian is you're so messed up, you needed Jesus to save you. And then you share your story, and then you share the gospel story. And even with the gospel story, we have an acrostic that we train them to really master the message of the gospel. It spells out gospel, and it tells a whole story from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22. And all of this is kind of built into the Dare to Share app and the Life in 6 Words app. So if people want more information, the training for that is on Dare to Share, but then kind of how to actually share that with somebody is on Life in 6 Words.
Mm-hmm. Now, how many years have you been doing the simulcast?
We 3 year. This is our third year doing it.
Yeah. How have you felt about that versus obviously, you're doing all these events before and now you're putting it all mostly into that one thing. How's that been going?
It's been going great. We had 68 cities the first year, then 93 last year, and then 126 this year, 561 churches. And what's cool about it, the 2-day conference was awesome. But our vision is every teen, everywhere, hearing the gospel from a friend. And we realize you can't scale a 2-day conference.
Yeah.
So, and people say, well, just simulcast that. I'm like, nobody wants to see a big party that they're not at. So we said, if we're going to do this, we're going to build a simulcast event built for the satellite sites. And so we do it live from Denver, but it's a 9 a.m. West Coast start, noon East Coast start. Every kid downloads a Dare to Share live app so they can talk to each other through the app. They can send the gospel conversation starting videos. So you have kids in New York talking to kids in California because they're getting the same training at the same time. And then they all go out to collect canned food for local rescue missions, do service projects, and share the gospel. And then they come back and we all share testimonies. It's a party.
So the service projects part, I think most people can relate to that. In fact, a lot of people are leading their students to probably do trips and service things like that. When they're sharing the gospel, what does that look like? I mean, who are they trying to share that with while they're out doing these service projects?
So the service projects have to have people involved in some way. So we say whatever service project you do, which most groups this year did the canned food collection door to door. So we said it has to have 3 different components: a prayer component, you're praying for people, caring for people, and sharing the gospel. And the prayer is basically when they, out, they're saying, hey, is there any way I can pray for you? And then people just all, that question opens people up. Not every time, but oftentimes. Mm-hmm. And then from there, you can get them into the spiritual conversation if they want to. And we have kind of the script they can walk through, but we have them practice it so they're not, it's not so. Our goal is conversations. It just takes a little while to be able to get kids there. So we have before training, during training, and after training for the event.
Mm-hmm. And they're going door, like you were saying, most of them are doing the canned food thing, going door to door. So that's how they're meeting people that they can talk to, as opposed to maybe just serving at a local shelter, which they could.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking. Some do that. Some do block. We've had groups do block parties. Next year, we're going to have kind of choose your own adventure. So they could do a canned food collection, a block party. They could, we'll have 3 or 4 different key ideas that they can, do, or they can do their own outreach. But our thing is, man, if you're not sharing Christ in some way out loud with words, you're not taking that risk enough. You're not taking risk enough. You never get persecuted for doing service projects. You get persecuted when you do those service projects, but you also say, by the way, can we talk to you about this? And it's that risk that produces the growth necessary in a teen's life. I think that when Jesus said the call to discipleship, pick up your cross, die to yourself, and follow me, that first death is not a physical death, it's a social death. And if you're not risking a social death, then you're not really growing like in a New Testament style. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the reason a lot of kids are leaving the church is because we're not challenging them to risk. We're boring them with fun and games and a short Bible, a harmless Bible lesson. And I'm like, dude, man, these kids need to be called to mission and to vision and to risk. And, the groups that are doing that are seeing great results, and the ones that aren't, we're seeing the trajectory of the rejection of the historic Christian faith, and we're using a traditional model of youth ministry to try to, close the gap. It's not going to happen. We need to go New Testament on them, and in a very loving, kind, humble way. We need to mobilize a generation for the gospel, and they're waiting for it. They are dying for it.
How, and maybe it hasn't, but has this changed over, the almost 3 decades now that you've been kind of doing this? Do you feel like, obviously culture and landscape and all that has changed, but in terms of what you all teach and how it works and the avenues and the methods and all that, has any of that changed, or do you feel like it's pretty much been the same even though culture has changed?
Well, in some ways, everything has changed, because social media and because we're increasingly post-Christian nation. In some ways, nothing has changed, because teenagers are teenagers, and they've always been looking for a king, a cause, and a crew, and that's always been true. Every major awakening has had teenagers on the leading edge of that awakening. And so, but the avenues and how you train and how you communicate the gospel doesn't change, but I think you have to communicate the meta narrative in this culture, the whole story. And apologetics, you don't use it as the opening line anymore. It's now the PS to the love letter of the gospel. So, you reframe it, but, you still give the gospel,
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I want social media, and like you have apps. I mean, so that's obviously something that's different. Do you think social media, how is it affecting all of this? Because obviously, social media has had a huge effect on our culture, on teens with the rise of depression and suicide and anxiety, and at the same time, the decrease in alcoholism, sex, and all these other things. But when it comes to something like this, again, I just wonder, are students less connected for real, more connected digitally, or in ways that aren't always for real? And what is the impact maybe on evangelism? I don't know. Is that something that you've seen, or what have you seen there?
Well, one, we are one of those weirdo events that say, make sure you bring your phones to our event. Don't leave. Yeah. And if you don't have one, tell your parents. If you have a flip phone, tell your parents we told you to get a smartphone. Which is weird, because we're like, hey, let's take Satan's weapon and turn it against them, and get these kids to become agents of hope online. The other thing is, what we've learned, especially through our summer trainings, Lead the Cause, where we were able to, for a week, really equip students to have conversations. Teenagers that are equipped to have face-to-face conversations where they know how to ask, admire, admit, and navigate a conversation. Because kids are so locked into their phones, those teenagers that know how to listen and ask great questions become like bees to flowers. Kids come to them. So I think it's a great opportunity to really teach kids to have conversations, and evangelism. It's a great opportunity for the church if we don't miss it, and if we don't dismiss teenagers and don't dismiss youth ministry, but really, I think, demand a reforming of youth ministry along the lines of the book of Acts. I wrote a book called Gospelize Your Youth Ministry, based on 7 values in the book of Acts that we actually discovered through a research project of the churches that were really killing it when it came to reaching and discipling teenagers. They were seeing 25% new conversion growth per year. All the churches, from urban, suburban to rural, from Pentecostal to Presbyterian, had 7 common values. And all those are in the Gospelize Your Youth Ministry, which could be Gospelize Your Family, could be Gospelize Your Church. And we sell that book on our website, daretoshare.org, but we also give a digital version away for free. If they just go to daretoshare.org store, look for the digital version of the book, and you can download it and read it free.
That's great. What would you say to youth leaders? I mean, obviously, if they want to help, Dare to Share offers like that simulcast live conference, or for students who want to go deeper, the live events in the summer. But like week to week, month to month, what would you want to say to leaders to kind of get this in the culture and just make this part of what we're passing on to students and helping them with?
Well, I think that's where that gospel advancing we have a website, gospeladvancing.org, that really is the culture changing website. So how do you put those 7 values in? And it starts with intercessory prayer. The number one defining characteristic of the youth groups that reached the most of the lost, prayed the most for the lost, which shouldn't surprise us. But we spend more time in announcements in a typical youth group meeting than intercessory prayer. It's true of our big church as well. When's the last time you guys, prayed for the lost as a big part of your service? And that's exactly what Paul tells Timothy in 1 Timothy 2, 1-8. First of all, pray for the lost. And Paul is telling Timothy, hey, here's how you program your services in Ephesus. Secondly, relational evangelism drives it. So your students need to be trained and equipped to share their faith. And then thirdly, leaders fully embrace and model it. So if the leaders aren't doing it, then how can we expect the kids to do it? And then I won't go through all the 7 values, but I encourage people to go, read the Gospelized book and go to gospeladvancing.org. But storytelling time in youth group. I mean, one of the reasons we love the book of Acts is full of stories. Well, our church services should be full of stories. Our youth group small groups should be full of stories of people who are engaged in good, bad, and ugly. So we want to bring back prayer time, storytelling time, equipping time, and all of a sudden youth group becomes causal, not just, dodgeball and pizza and a 10-minute lesson. Mm-hmm. Nothing against dodgeball. I think it's a perfect analogy for life. So
or pizza. I mean, I don't know if pizza is a perfect analogy, but I like pizza, so
pizza is
nothing
awesome.
against that either. What about like volunteers? So, I mean, obviously there's leaders listening and they want to help their students, and then they got a team of volunteers, right? That also, like you said, need to be on board because it needs to be modeled. How have you seen churches do this well with their volunteers in terms of training them and equipping them as well?
Well, first of all, kind of having those 7 values as a grid, and that if a volunteer is not willing at least to learn how to pray for the lost and learn how to reach out to their own neighbors, family, friends, and coworkers, then they shouldn't be volunteers in a youth ministry. Luke 6:40, Jesus said, no student is above their teacher. When they're fully trained, they'll be like their teacher. So the volunteers you choose, adult and student, become the bar. They become the standard. They become you're telling your kids, this is what I want you to look like as a student. Here's what I want you to look like as an adult. And so if they're not growing in their faith and sharing their faith and making disciples, then why are they leaders? And if they're not willing to, not that they got to come in hot to that. They just got to be willing to, okay, well, I don't know how, but I'm willing to learn. Okay, well, great. If you're ready and willing, we'll make you able by the grace of God.
How do you think leaders can help make them able? Because I'm thinking about, what if there's a youth ministry that cares a lot about this, great leaders, but this hasn't been a value. Evangelism, as much as they want to have students invite their friends and they're out there and inviting, but it's not like this, where you are taking the risks and you are really sharing the gospel personally. What would you say to them to help them kind of maybe kickstart this with their leaders and then with students?
I would say you came to the right place. We're like Liam Neeson in Taken. We have a very particular set of skills,
That's good.
And we've honed it for 28 years, and we have curriculum. We have books. I've written 20 books on, in and around this subject, mostly for youth leaders and students. We have tons of curriculum. We have Dare to Share Live. We have Lead the Cause in the summer. We want to make it inexcusable. Like, you have everything you need right here. We have free apps, Dare to Share and Life in 6 Words and Gospel Advancing Ministry. They can just download. If anybody's serious about it, to go to daretoshare.org and kick around a little bit, you'll see everything. You got everything you need to get started. And we're not the only ones. There's other organizations out there too, but this is tailor-made for youth leaders, volunteers, and teenagers.
Mm-hmm. What do you see in the future? I mean, I've read about. I love the vision that every student or teen will hear about the gospel from a friend. But like, what do you see down the road with Dare to Share and what you all are doing? Obviously, going to the live simulcast event was kind of a big shift, certainly. But like, is there something down the road you can tell us about, or that you see, or what the future might hold?
So next year we're trying to figure out. We had one of the live events in Ireland. Their outreach was at 10:30 at night, so I'm assuming they were going to local pubs to share the gospel.
Yeah.
So we're like, how do we take Dare to Share Live global? We had 90,000 youth leaders outside the U.S. Accessing daretosshare.org last year. It's growing and growing. We've partnered with Word of Life, who's in 74 countries. They have 1,500 missionaries to youth. They've adopted our vision statement, every teen everywhere, hearing the gospel from a friend, as their own. They're training the 7 values. So we're trying to think, how do we globalize this? How do we create a gospel advancing networks in every city where a group of youth leaders conspire on a regular basis to help each other grow and go, share best practices, steal from the largest youth group in town, which is Satan's. How do we make it span from Pentecostal to Presbyterian, urban, suburban, rural? How do we make this not about Dare to Share, but about the gospel advancing movement? And how do we help other ministries win and even change the way they talk about this whole thing? So we're really into not ecumenical. I have no desire to get in a big circle and sing kumbaya, but a gospel advancing network of what we call 5G theology. If you believe in God, God's Son, God's Spirit, God's Word, and Gospel, then we can put our hands in the middle. And I don't want to argue about peripheral things, but let's unite to fight to reach every teen everywhere. Let's come together, as in the words of General Stanley McChrystal, as a team of teams to tackle entire cities. Let's see city gospel movements go across the globe, and let's see it grow and glow to the point where nobody even knows who's running it. It's the Holy Spirit who's driving this thing. So I want to see revival, man. I'm tired of reading about revivals from the past. I want to experience one before I die and play our role. We're not the key. The key is the church. Jesus never said, I will build my 501c3 nonprofit. He said, I will build my church. And we just want to play our role in energizing the church to mobilize youth to gospelize their world. We just want to play our little role in doing that. So that's our vision. 1 billion teens worldwide. We want every one of them have every last chance to hear the gospel from a friend.
That's awesome. You're obviously passionate about it, and I love that it's like local church focused and driven and all that, and you're there to help support the local church, which is just great. Anything else you'd add? Anything else you'd tell people as we kind of wrap up?
I got a podcast too. If you're a youth leader and interested in finding out more information, it's called Gospelize. IZE, Gospelize, with Greg Stier. And it's just once a month, a 30-minute direct to youth leader challenge, encouragement, sermon to youth leaders. We have practical takeaways, but it really is to encourage and inspire them to build a gospel advancing ministry. And we're right in the middle of a podcast series on those 7 values. So it's wherever podcasts are, I don't know, not sold, but whatever.
Downloaded, maybe search. Yeah.
Thanks for the word. Yeah,
that's good.
But yeah.
Well, how can people? We're going to link to all this in the show notes because you've listed a lot of the great resources you all share between the apps and the website and books and things like that. We'll link all that. But social media wise, it's Dare to Share. How can they connect with you?
Yeah, just Greg Stier, Stier, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. So just Greg Stier. Stier.
Awesome. Well, Greg, thanks for taking time to come on the podcast. Thanks for the work you're doing with Dare to Share. I mean, so much of an impact over 3 decades and hopefully so much more to come. That's awesome. I love the vision. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for letting me on. All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Well, that was a fun conversation. Greg has been leading kind of an amazing ministry and effort for a number of years. And if you're like me and you don't have the spiritual gift of evangelism, and maybe you're not as bold as he is about that, you feel a little convicted. And you also wonder, how could I do that? Right. And he talked about some of the practical ways that we can do this. And I think all of us could do this better, especially in youth ministry for sure, where they probably have more connections than most adults, particularly with other people who are not a part of any church, being in school and sports and activities and things like that. That's one of the things that I know hurts those of us that work on church staff, as we get into the church culture and church staff, we have less and less connections with people who aren't a part of any church. And so it's harder, right? We have to be more intentional about reaching out to those people. And a few action items I thought of coming out of this interview would be one, of course, to check out Dare to Share, and maybe you want to take part in a live event. Another action step would be to teach your students, if you lead student ministry, practical evangelism, or maybe you lead kids ministry. You want to give them a way to invite kids, and students oftentimes are more bold than we would be at that. And then the third thing I think about, which might be the most important, is who can we invite to church? Who can we talk about the gospel with? Who is someone that's connected to us in our life, in our neighborhood, maybe through a sports team? I think about the sports that my kids are in and the opportunities there to connect with other parents and invite them to church and talk about faith. Who is that one person that you can talk to this week, this month? I mean, we're recording this and Easter's right around the corner. Maybe that's the opportunity to invite them to church. I don't know, but I think that would be a great action step to take. As I mentioned in the beginning, you can get the links and notes at nickblevins.com/episode 182. And don't forget to check out ministryboost.org, as membership is now launched. Founding members is open, and it's $20 a month. It won't be that price again. It closes March 12th. And then mastermind groups are forming as well, and they'll close around that same time, a little bit after probably, and then launch late March, early April. So check that out at ministryboost.org. Thanks for listening. Hope it was helpful, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.